second for a big pipe in. That in over here was like me. All right, welcome to class. Marker. I don't see any in here. Well, that's not good. I have to grab a marker. Got a whole bunch. Yeah, I didn't bring any with me. All right, well, let's see if the one I did is still here. Found that. See if I found the other ones I didn't. That's the thing about having kids is you learn how to squirrel stuff away where you can have it just in case someone gets in and starts really messing with your stuff. Well,
Actually,
all right, welcome to Crim Law 1. First thing, here's how you prevent theft. You don't. You just plan for it. That's actually kind of true. It's like that's the whole point of the law. You can't stop it, so we do stuff to try to deal with it as it happened. All right, so I think see where we left off. I'd say I slept in it since the last time we had class, but not nearly enough. Let's see, 3, 4. Good, because 5, I think when we start getting into life and death. Ooh, and we're at the end. So I think we're off into life and death. Types of defenses. Yes, good. Let's see if we can roll through this real quick to make sure we didn't skip anything in here. Physical force, deadly force. Depending on the class and how much time we have, I tend to spend quite a bit of time talking about force and deadly force kind of stuff. We're getting ready to roll into murder though, so it's going to kind of overlap there. So the first thing you need to realize is that, well, it's sort of like what something we were talking about at the very beginning of class. So there's no action that's not legal in certain circumstances across time. There's nothing that's illegal. It's like, if you look at cultures across time, it's like you can't, I haven't been able to find a behavior I've found that is completely unacceptable at any point in time. It's like, just see cannibalism, that kind of a thing. So we're trying to figure out what works best for society. And we've recognized that violence is always going to be part of the equation, no matter what we do. That's why we have to have statutes on it, right? Because it's going to happen. People are going to get violent. We're animals at the end of the day. All right. That'll actually set some of the primer for the next conversation. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about that kind of stuff as we roll into what it is to be engaging in the act of homicide. We'll go ahead and grab this out. Bing. Open. And let's see, how big is this? See if I can move this over a little bit and see if I can, oh, you guys can kind of see what's going on the computer, but you don't necessarily need to watch or me share the screen. You can see what we're talking about. All right. So the first thing that we need to start talking about is this distinction right here. Homicide. Okay, so what does that term mean to you? Let's see. Admit. I'm going to grab them, move back here and see if I can actually use both again. Enable editing. Okay. So homicide is a blanket term, right? Best term I like to say is animals and mammals, right? All mammals are animals, but not all animals are mammals, right? Same thing for homicide. This is like somewhat all inclusive, right? This is just one person killing another person. Where we'll run into other terms that'll branch off from this has to do with kind of intent in text. Good golly. Went a little bit farther. Intent, context, and it's not keeping up with the mind. There's not. Maybe situation, that kind of stuff. And this is how we stratify this action. One person killing another. Right? And there's a number of different ways that we do it, depending on what it is we're talking about. So the first one It's going to be this. Murder. Right? You start dealing with the term homicide. Let's see what popped up. Yeah, admit. Give it a second. You'll also find other terms that will pop up. You'll see them without the screen. Move this out of the way. You might find some of the terms like patricide, regicide, all the different sides. They're actually going to come from this term. And what they're doing here is they're delineating out who those different people are, the relationships there. We don't use this so much in the law side, but you'll see this used in language. I'm trying to think if there's any points of time we actually use those terms. I don't think so. All right. That's kind of like an understood one. That's kind of going to be in there. So sometimes people use that. So the relationships matter. That's been something across time. And then you have, well, so like all the other reasons. You say, we won't say manslaughter because that's one we can have specific intent there. We'll say general intent, specific intent, types of crimes, right? So you have the thing that where people talk about in terms of relationships. You have the thing that people talk about in terms of, this guy murdered somebody, right? What you're talking about there is a specific type of intent. And then you have the general intent stuff. Specific intent, you actually break out into a few other types because you've got those degrees related to it. And then when you start getting into that quasi area between these things, we start looking at things like manslaughter, vehicular homicide, that kind of thing, right? Because those aren't the same kind of thing as murder. Manslaughter might be, right? Manslaughter might be something we just couldn't establish the intent. It really was murder. Vehicular homicide is going to be something different, that kind of thing. You can see when we use this term, it covers a whole bunch of stuff. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is aspects of just life and death, because we got to start there. Because, well, as that first slide indicates, well, second slide, technically, the first real slide, we've got some questions and we don't know how to draw distinctions. That's what this system does, is it teaches you how to draw distinctions. Okay. So, since there's a relationship there, you've got two things there. Be another human being and the definition of death. Okay? You've got another life, death. Two big concepts. What is it to be alive? What is it to be dead? We're going to start there. Which one do you want to start with, life or death? Life. Okay. Cool. Life. What is it to be alive? Ooh. That's always my favorite answer. Are we? I'm sorry. I love being able to talk. I should be yourself about that. Questions here. All right, so you have the philosophical element of it, right? Because that is part of it. As you start diving into that philosophical element of what is it to be alive, what is it to exist? Yeah, that's actually what kind of the pursuit that you're doing here, right? And so as we're trying to do that, legitimately, we try to find different points in times to classify when something begins or when something ends. It isn't easy. How many of you ever had a biology class with the lab? Okay. How many of you had to do dissections? Okay. If you haven't had to do those, if watch a video on it, what you'll see is like if they do a frog dissection, tell me the distinctions there for just the digestive tract, where the throat moves from, I guess you'd say the throat itself to the esophagus to the stomach to the intestines, right? As you just open the thing up and look at it, it's like, the heck am I looking at? Bunch of nasty stuff. It's not until you really get in and look at it, you're like, okay, there's a small distinction here. The thing closes off here. So it's the same kind of thing here when we start doing life. The distinctions in biology are not always, in some ways they're very clear and straightforward, but seeing exactly what they're doing and knowing what they are is very difficult. It wasn't until the last, century to figure out what DNA really even is. Right. So our distinctions, our knowledge are not very good. So common ways that people draw that line. Can you kill it? I mean, if you can kill it, you know it's alive. That's one way. But we won't focus on that one so much. Okay. So we're dealing with life. What are the common places, the points at which people draw that? Okay, there's a big issue in society related to this specific issue. What is it? Life and death. Society. It's an election season. Gosh, probably should have some opinions on this. Usually, this is one of those things that I can't get people to stop talking about. Seeing quiet is kind of curious for me. It really is. All right. So, the easiest place to start with, time ordering. Time is going to be a factor. So the ways that people do that with life, you start at the beginning. Right? So what are we talking about here?
Birth.
Yeah, you're talking about birth. Right? Okay. Birth. So when we're talking about this issue, we're also talking about political issue of reproduction. Like that's a scary one. Always a scary one. If you do it right, you leave it untouched. If you do it wrong, you end up in the area of eugenics, no matter how you do it, because that's what you're doing. Right? You start making choices about this at all, you're actually technically engaging in that because you're choosing. And that's one of those things. It's like that's a really scary concept if you really think about it over time. People do with it in the negative ways they take it. Horrible. But so is this topic in some ways. It's negative because we're talking about life and death. So birth's one point in time. You're born. What do we mean by that? Birth. Harder conversation. Still. Not a lot. Okay. So that one. So you can be born and not to be alive. But for most people, they aren't. Okay. What are the other ways? Yes, I have this conversation. That's no, seriously, because is it nervous to talk about? Is that what it is? I think I'm so quiet all of a sudden. Okay. That's what makes me nervous. You guys get quiet. It's like, don't be quiet. Talk. All right. Other ways we do it. Okay. We'll step away from that issue for a second because you'll see where it parallels. Ooh. Car accident. Get in the hospital. When we get there, a person's had so much brain injury. There's no activity going on there. Lower brain's still working, heart's still going, still breathing. Live or dead? Maybe. Unknown. Right? Because there's a lot we don't know what's going on there. Why is that person out? Ooh, I don't know. Is that kind of like there's no like frontal cortex, like you're gonna have some problems there, right? Or is it something like, yeah, it may have massive head injury, but we don't know the scope of it. We can't tell. We're gonna have to wait to see what happens. Then you really don't know. It's like, what different things did I mention just there in that situation? I mentioned what biological facets? Okay. Brain. What else?
Breathing.
Yeah. Lungs. Move. What else? Right? Start dealing with your brain. You're doing electrical impulses. That's brain. You start dealing with the lungs. Yeah, that's going to feed everything else because that's a big, obvious movement you can see in someone. Are they breathing? Right. Next one, heart. Is it going? Right. You won't necessarily feel that one, see that one. You can feel that one. When these things stop moving, think, think, think. When these things stop, are we over in this territory? How long does it take? Think about this again. How long does it take? If it just momentarily stops, are you dead? There's a little bit of gray period in there, isn't there? I might be able to intervene and do something. Ooh, that's a different caveat, right? That distinction isn't quite 100%, right? You can have people who completely die and actually come back. How long? Can you start talking about there? How much of a time delay is that? The most extremes I've heard of were people who were drowning in frozen water, and you start talking about half an hour they were dead. Yeah, they came back anyway. What is that? I don't know. Were they dead? Yeah. What do they say about it? A bunch of crazy stuff. So there's something there, right? We know there's permanence to that to some degree, but there's also, I guess, some permeability in where we draw that line. Okay. Next, we'll jump back to this one for a second. When we're dealing with this issue, how is it people typically deal with it? The birth. When you're dealing with life and death. Typically, whenever you move into this in a social front, as you discuss it, what you'll move into is the topic of abortion. It's the most common one because it's the one where we're trying to make the distinction of where life begins, because that's when we start to treat it with the we treat it like it's supposed to kind of thing. When are you obligated to protect a life? Is the question. What people do typically they'll look at some combination of those biological factors. You'll deal with that development, embryonic development, fetal development, whatever you want to call it. It's just development, right? And you'll intersect time and see, okay, this is when the brain develops. You back it up enough, it's neural tube. That's the ability to feel pain. That's one line that people draw. Okay. Next one, you have lungs. Those develop at such and such week. Okay. You have when you're born, do you breathe? Realize that whole thing about smacking kids on the backside is to make sure that they start breathing, because they haven't been breathing all of their life. right? That's a framing thing. I just said all of their life. That's a bias there. You should pick that up. Heart. Do you have one? What does it look like? When it first develops, is it a heart? It's what will go on to be the heart. It doesn't have 4 chambers. So is it technically a heart or is it a heart? It's going to be the heart. Those cells there will be the heart. It's time, right? You get into the political debates. It's funny because you can see 2 sides having 2 different conversations, but if you intersect the 2, you can start getting more of the full story. With that one, it's good parallel is someone who's comatose, right? If you're asleep and we don't know the prognosis, it's good or bad, and we don't know when you're going to wake up, when is it okay to just pull? And if they keep living, is it okay not to feed them and water them? Right? Admit. How is that any different from this? All you have to do is wait, right? It's a lot different, honestly. But from that philosophical concept, it's like, yeah, you can take those 2 issues and lay them out in the same field. Whenever you get into the actual details of it, it's going to be slightly different, but you can do that to some degree. You start dealing with this one across time. You have that issue with development, and you have the issue with the third one. You have all the combinations of these things and how it relates to this act right here. So this is the actual act of being born. These are developmental things. The other way that we determine whether life has actually started on the aggregate, kind of as a social thing. Viability, right? You go into that term. What you'll find what that means is it's the likelihood that a child will survive if born and cared for at that specific point in development, right? You stop and think about that for a second. What that means is that at that one particular point in time, that we're making this distinction right here, 50% of kids born at that age will survive. So that measure is based off of probabilities, potentialities, not the actual thing. When you start looking at the number that's given for that, realize that that's going to be bound by technology, availability, and a whole bunch of other things that it shouldn't. That's why it starts getting more complex. And it does. It gets very complex very quickly. From there, you look at the ranges here for how far back and how, of course, going forward, it's just going to increase. Of course, what's the likelihood of death? It's non-zero the whole way through. That's why you guys are always concerned about death, right? It's always there. How early has the earliest baby been born and survived here in this country? Something like 22 weeks. 22 weeks. That's not the line that they draw for viability, though, for recognizing that people are alive at that stage, even though someone was. It's like that's the distinction you need to realize here, is we have to deal with it at the aggregate level, and then we have to deal with it in a way that we can allow for those individual exceptions to be recognized in a good way, not in a bad way. What do I mean in the bad way? The bad way is the way it actually runs. Depending on how much time we have in the next few weeks, we'll go through this, and then I'll actually break it down some of this a little bit more for you to see how nasty this one is, because it feeds right into this. That's why a lot of textbooks, if you look at them, they'll include abortion in this topic. Right? It's not a bias so much as it is. It's like it's a societal kind of argument you kind of need to understand to some degree. That's one that they don't tell you about right there. That's an important one, because now it matters who you are and where you live and how much money you have. Oh, shit. Now we're in some problems. Right? That's not how our society is supposed to work. You know, how our society is supposed to work. What do I want to talk about there? There's a couple of things I want to talk about. Then we'll move back into homicide. Basically, what the most interesting thing about this subject is it's one of those things with a dualistic nature. If you start moving into the abortion topic itself, overall it's negative, but the results there are both positive and negative. The overall context itself is negative. However, what they'll do is they'll say that this itself is a choice, which makes it positive. No, it is not. You look at those numbers, that's a lie. Because you'll see that if that's the case, then why is it the average person who gets one is a black female who's middle-aged with more than one kid in New York? Why is it if you're a black female with kids in New York, you're more likely to have an abortion than be able to have kids? That's not the choice. That's a lack of a choice. That's a different thing. It's a lie. It's something that happens a lot. So these issues, they get complex. It's like you want to preserve this choice, but you also need to recognize this is a difficult situation. It's not something to be taken on in a cavalier fashion. It's serious. Okay. So that's a little bit about that. Now we'll get into some technical stuff about it, right? So that's why I start out with that slide with another human being. Is it you or is it not? You start dealing with abortion, that's another aspect of it. Is it you or is it not? That's the viability one. If you can survive independent, you are your own life. If you can't, ooh, questions start to arise. But then again, look back at medicine, how many people require medicine to live? Do we not count them as alive? See how dangerous this is. That's the argument you start making. If you're not careful, it will propagate. It's like what happens to your people who have not just mental, but physical, emotional, all those areas start opening up. Because what happens is you started to question what this is. So that's one of those things where it can be very negative and very fast if you don't care. But another life. So that's that living human being. When does that point life begin? Issue of fetal death and abortion. Yeah. Like again, though, that's the whole process of reproduction. So realize that probabilities there are at play. And if you look at biology, what you'll see there is there are a lot of different ways that animals do that, plants too, and most of them are unsuccessful. But if you actually did the numbers on that, it's like you don't ever actually think about that. Stop and think about, and I'll show you some of these numbers as we get into it, so wait and see the true numbers, because the numbers they report to you are numbers that are they don't mean anything. So giving you an idea, it's like, okay, how many people could be engaging in that act of reproduction in any one period of time, right? How many people actually get pregnant and how many people have an abortion? What they'll give you is the number of, what is it? I think if I remember correctly, it's like the number of abortions per people who could even get pregnant. It's like, okay, what does that tell me? That there's a population and that there's some abortions. Like, no, what I need to know is I need to know what is that percentage of pregnancies that get opted out of, because that's a different number. That's a different thing. That's the thing that we really want to know. None of them report that. Why? Because of what I said about certain groups. If you run into an area where you find that it's more than likely to be aborted than born, you start identifying serious problems and you're back over in politics that no one's doing. Most often cessation breath or heartbeat. Yes, that's a very common way to do it, but they go even wider than that. Here's where it starts getting into it. All right. That element of time is a central one, right? If you notice, how many times did it come up? And I just said it again when I said time, right? How things interact and their ordering matters a great deal. As we start dealing with this historically, that's why it has this year and a day rule, English common law. It says it's expanded due to medical advances, right? So historically, if you think back before modern medicine, you could die from stubbing your toe. You literally could. I forget who it was. It was a banker or something like that. Got ticked up, kicked his safe, split his toe, infection killed him. right? I'd actually find the person's name because it's kind of one of those uh, notable stories because what it is, rich person kind of thing, angry about money, already has a lot of it, kicks the safe out of frustration. That's what kills him, right? Yeah. If you had an infirmity, it wouldn't take long for it to take you out. That's why they had this. A year and a day. Why? If you got something going on, odds are you're going to be dead within a year and a day. If not, you'll die for some other reason. That's what it is. The value of life that we have in this country is valued a bit differently than other countries. If you don't believe that, um, ooh, good example. This would be horrible. Don't do this. There's a series of movies called Real Faces of Death. I don't know if they still make those or not. What it is those are real videos of people who actually are in like war zones and things like that. And you can see how people treat others in those situations and even the respect that they give to those once they're dead. It's like that's what you start tapping into a little bit. That respect, that sanctity of life. You're in the day because of medical stuff. If I shot you, thinking a bar, it's a barroom thing. Yeah. Um, Modern medicine, surgery. We get you set up. Not that case that long ago. You would have died. It bled out, infection, something of that nature. So very short time frames. Medical advances kind of show you how complex it gets. I've talked about the but for principle, right? That concept that the responsibility here applies to you, but for something else comes in and interceding incidences, right? I shot a guy, but it was his toe. They wouldn't take him to the hospital and stitched it up, but boy, they messed him up and they killed him. I'm not responsible for that. I might have put the person in a position where that happened. I didn't do that, right? That's going to be that medical malpractice that did that. On the other side, I shot Bob in the spine. Bob's now paralyzed, right? We'll say time period of 3 years goes by, right? Bob's in a wheelchair. Bob doesn't have any caretakers, anything like that. Bob's at a park. Wheelchair gets stuck. Bob falls out of wheelchair. He's alone. He roasts out in the summer sun. He dies from exposure. Is that murder? It can be, because I'm the one who put Bob in the wheelchair. That's me that removed his ability to walk. That's why that stuff starts expanding, right? It gets a lot more complicated. The time windows, stuff that we carry, and the infirmities that it causes. A lot longer time frames. Here's where it starts talking about multiple causation. Negligent acts after criminal acts do not necessarily relieve criminal culpability unless it was a substantial factor, right? Has to be a substantial factor. So you have to deal with how much of a factor it is. So you have to do some weighing there. And the things you're weighing are going to change, which is why they don't specify. Okay. Next one, body of crime. Hope still like that. This one usually comes up in this section because most people think literal body. That's why I have that there. Well, it's not necessarily required. You can establish that person's dead in other ways, right? That person's been missing for X number of days, months, years. We've seen no activities of these kinds that indicate this. And every now and again, you'll have someone who comes out of the woods and says, "No, I'm still alive. I just," that kind of things. Like you can do that, but realize that it is important to be able to have some cases, even if you don't have body. Okay, so here's what gets into common elements. The unlawful act or omission. Depending on how you set it up, you can just be omitting an act. Okay. You have the required intent. You are the legal cause for a victim's death. Okay, hold on for a second there. Legal cause? What does that mean? Legal cause? What do you mean legal cause? What/who determines that? That's a person. It's a person there. Okay, stop and just think about that for a second. That means that person is going to be subject to all the potential problems a person is subject to. All of us are subject to. Biggest one there is going to be probably corruption. Why is it I bring that up? It's an important facet to realize. It's like you have this thing classified legally as something that it isn't, then it isn't, right? Refer back to bees and fish in California. There's that one once already, right? Bees are fish. No. In their legal system, bees are fish. Yes. Understand? They don't know biology. No, it's not that. It was the easier way to address the issue. Easy way, rather than the right way. What they thought was right. Coroner, medical examiner, that kind of thing. Those are just going to make those things, whoever's filling it out. Here's why I mentioned this. There's a documentary about boys on the track. I think about pulling it up, show you. It's available on YouTube. They've got it free. It dates back to, I want to say, the mid-90s. I want to say maybe a little bit later than that. 3-part series on YouTube. You see it because it'll be broken up. Find the right one. What it is? It's about Arkansas. Small county. I believe it's Saline County. It's called Saline. In it, in the 80s, they had a medical examiner, coroner, whatever his title was, death investigator, something like that. Quite clearly corrupt. The documentary identifies that. Starts out boys on the track were 3 juvenile boys. I want to say, I can't remember, they're even teenagers. They were found dismembered on train tracks. When you start looking at just the filing themselves, the medical examiner said it looked like they had fallen asleep on the tracks. Okay, well, what's this unregistered gun over here and all this other stuff? It just happened to disappear. We can see it on video, and it's not in the logs anywhere, right? And it gets worse from there. In terms of the things that person had done, the best one was there was a person who was beheaded. He ruled it as was it accidental, something like that. Tried to blame the family dog for eating a person's head, like lies, just straight lies. Politics in place. That person got a raise. Stuff you need to watch. Okay. Legal cause of victim's death. Realize that is a potential problem. Because we have people who are literally killed. But we have ruled that's not a homicide. So even if you are alive, we can still choose to not recognize you as being murdered. Yeah, that's bad. That's why this stuff's so important. Okay. Victim must be a living human being. It's another one. You're not a person. I almost want to talk about literary works that deal with people being unpersoned, but I'm not going to do that. Death must occur within a reasonable period. Pretty straightforward there. Boom. So here's some of the different types that they'll break things out into. And so, trying to think what it is I'm going to talk about here. The different states will deal with different terms in different ways, and some of the ways that these things interact. So the first one's basically all these are different types of intent, but the intent to kill versus the intent to inflict great bodily harm, right? Those are 2 different types of intents. You need to be able to establish either, right? Because if what you get here is the probability of death, here it's a certainty. Down here it's a little bit lower, right? What is the lowest threshold for an action that kills somebody? An aggressive action that kills somebody, a violent action that kills somebody. Does anyone know? It's extremely easy to kill someone. It happens accidentally all the time. My favorite stories are like the barroom brawls where you have 2 friends who get into a fight, one hits the other, the person who gets hit falls down, hits head, dead. That's not an uncommon thing. It's like, that's how dangerous that stuff is. So that's one of the reasons why that's a justification for justifiable homicide too. But someone's got this intent, that's when you know you're moving off in this area. Depraved heart's another one of those terms with intent. It has to do with the circumstances of it. I'm usually blanking out on exactly what that one was. I have a statute in here that talks about it here in a second. Intent to commit a felony and murder for hire. Those are two different things in terms of how they're handled statutorily. Kind of similar, right? Because you're dealing with other crimes associated with murder, but two different ways that we do it. All right, so murder for hire is kind of direct. Everybody knows that. It's intent to commit a felony. That's where things get a little bit more gray, because your original intent isn't there to necessarily commit murder. It's just really I'm engaged in a criminal pursuit and ain't nothing going to stop me. Right? That's exactly what you start dealing with there. If you're committing a felony, push on fast. How many armed robbers have an unloaded gun? Right. Okay. So, to some degree, they know what they're doing when they get started. They know what the potentials are, and they're the ones in control of the situation, aren't they? Because they're the ones dictating what happens when and where and with what. You have a whole bunch of people involved in it. Let's say it's a small smash and grab, right? You're going to walk into a jewelry store, you and 3 friends, you're going to start smashing and grabbing stuff. Okay? Let's say it's you, it's Rob, and it's Bob. I like that because it also sounds like you're stealing something there too. You, Rob, and Bob. Okay, so it's you, Rob, and Bob. You're in this jewelry store. You're getting ready to smash and grab. What you don't realize is that Rob right here, he bought a Saturday Night Special. You know what Saturday Night Special is? You guys heard that term? Yeah, Saturday Night Special is a reference to a firearm that's a piece of crap, right? These are the kinds you'll find. They're usually like old revolvers that are falling apart. They'll have duct tape holding the handle together or some other issues like that, because you literally got the cheapest thing you can kill somebody you can find, because you don't normally have resources to do this kind of thing. So you just get whatever you can. Saturday Night Special. And of course, that robbery, Rob decides to pull out his gun and he shoots one of the people in there. Has Rob done something wrong? Of course. That person dies. Is it murder? Yes, this is murder. What about you and Bob? It is. Basically, what you get into here is it's the reasonable outcomes for the things that you're doing. You're engaging in criminal actions. You're engaging in criminal actions with criminals who don't follow the laws. What are the limits there for the laws that they won't follow? Ooh, sky's the limit. And so, yeah. And so some states, what they'll do is they'll work the statutes to where your murder statutes will include murder for intent, felony murder. Some don't have it called out as a separate one. Usually what ends up happening is this one right here is treated the same as this one and this one, right? You all go in for whether it's first degree murder or capital murder. That's what Arkansas does. They actually have your murder statutes, and they have a capital murder statute. That's if you're engaging in a felony and someone dies, every criminal involved is responsible for that death. Every single one of them can be charged with murder and should be. Cool. And so that's a little bit how that works. We'll pick up with degrees of murder and some more of these discussions next week. I will not see you Wednesday. Have a great day. If you need anything, let me know. Yeah, have a good week.
We don't have class Wednesday?
We don't have class Wednesday. I'll be out of state. That's that SWAC J thing. Originally, I was trying to get my math class going to that, but I just ran out of time, so it didn't work from home. But there'll be other opportunities in the future. And so, there's a methods class. I will talk about that in this class. But with Have a great day, and I will see you next week. Have fun. Bye. Zooms over here.